Hi everybody, so continuing on from the talk about pantomime, I wanted to talk about some research that we've been doing back in Australia that's kind of experimentally looking at how languages are created and how they evolve and adapt over time. So we all know that we as language researchers face a very specific challenge. How can we hope to study how languages begin when everybody that we know on the planet, or almost everybody, has been exposed to a complex, conventional and symbolic language from birth? Add to this the fact that language doesn't fossilise, so as we know, this means that when we die, the neural structures that gave rise to our language abilities vanish along with us, which means that although we can trace the path of our physical evolution back through the fossil record, we're left hypothesising about how we developed this ability that so characterises our species today. Essentially, we're left wondering how we got from this all the way to this. It's changed quite a lot. Now, as we heard in the previous talk, there is this argument that the emergence of language could have been preceded by a stage of pantomimic communication, or that pantomimes can enable people to comprehend what someone else is meaning when they don't share a common language. So in other words, these iconic gestures that are performed in the absence of speech can act as a bridge between two people who don't share a language. Unlike conventional symbols or symbolic signs, pantomimes are able to represent meaning directly, and they're iconic because they allow us to physically reenact whatever we're communicating about. As we've heard, they also tend to be improvised, holistic and open-ended, and it's these traits that make them a really good candidate for a precursor to language, because they could have enabled our ancestors to communicate about things in the world around them without requiring that they had a shared language to begin with. So in that previous slide, Mr. Bean was travelling in a country where he didn't speak the language, so he was forced to suppress his conventional language and instead used a kind of communicative pantomime, although we can debate how iconic his motion for train is now that we all ride modern trains. But anyway, back at UWA, we use a similar method to look at how modern humans create new communication systems, and doing this helps us draw conclusions about what sorts of factors contribute to the emergence of new sign systems. So we prohibit participants from using their conventional language as though they're in a foreign country, and we ask them instead to create new sign systems, either out of gestures, so this is a pair communicating drive in the gesture modality, or out of vocalizations. And that was someone communicating bird through vocalizations. And our findings have led us to develop a model for sign creation and change that places these iconic or motivated signs at the very first stage of language creation. And this ties in quite well with theories of, that iconic pantomime might have preceded language. But what happened next? It's pretty obvious that our modern languages don't comprise all that many effortful, improvised, holistic and non-conventional signs. Somehow our early pantomime changed across time and evolved into the likes of Shakespeare, the Beatles, and Larry David. So from our humble beginnings in pantomime, our communication systems seem to have become now shared, symbolic, and refined. And this process of language evolution is what we've tried to explain in our model of sign creation and change. And this is based on findings taken from communication tasks that we've run over the last few years. So for the rest of my talk, I'd like to go over the different components of our model, the evidence that supports them, and the role that we think they play in taking language from motivated, potentially pantomimic beginnings into these refined, symbolic, and shared communication systems. So the model boils down to four main components. First, we have this motivated sign production, which leads to cognitive alignment, being able to understand each other and have shared representations mentally. Behaviour alignment, which is replicating each other's signs, and sign refinement. And I'll talk about each one of those in turn now. So as I've already said, there's a lot of evidence that motivated signs are a necessary precursor to language. Motivated signs provide us with a solution to Harned's symbol grounding problem. That is, how can we ground the meaning of a new sign if we don't have a pre-existing shared language to use to define it? And although we can't go back to see the origins of the first human communication systems, we can look at relatively modern languages, so 1 to 5,000 year old languages. And when we look at them, we see that many of them have their roots in motivated signs. So for instance, this Sumerian cuneiform scripts started out as highly motivated representations, like the ones you can see there, only gradually becoming more symbolic over time. And in the same way, American Sign Language also started out as a very highly iconic communication system. Some of the signs have retained high iconicity, so we see that one. But also some appear to have gradually lost it over time as well, becoming more symbolic. So in the lab, we ask participants to play these referential communication games where they have to communicate lists of words to a partner. And we look at them either using only gestures or only non-linguistic or non-lexical vocalizations, so sounds that aren't words. And after every game, the pair swaps roles. So the person who had been communicating becomes the guesser, and the person who had been guessing becomes the communicator for the next round. They communicate the same words each time, and this means we can look at how successful their sign system becomes over time and how their signs change and develop. And we measure their communication success in terms of how many signs the guesser correctly guesses. The participants who manage to communicate successfully achieve cognitive alignment. So as I've said, their mental representations are aligned and they understand each other. And again, we see that this cognitive alignment is achieved much more often when participants communicate using motivated signs. So I'll just show you these two participants communicating key across 6 games. So notice how the first sign produced is more complex and more highly iconic as the pair tries to establish this shared meaning. And that after this point, the participants begin to copy each other's signs, which you'll see in a moment. So by the end, they're copying each other's signs and they're producing simpler and more refined signs as well. We look at the participants' identification accuracy. So as I was saying, it's the number of correct guesses that the guesser made. And that's our way of measuring cognitive alignment. We use it as a proxy to see how well they understand each other's, the meaning of each other's signs. And we also rate the signs that participants produce for how motivated they are. So from 0, which is non-iconic, symbolic, low motivation, all the way to 6, which is a highly iconic, highly motivated sign. And when we look at the relationship between identification accuracy and sign motivation, we see that there's a linear trend. In both the gesture and vocal modalities, the participants who produce more motivated signs have more successful communication compared to those producing less motivated signs. So we can see how essential motivated signs are for enabling participants to align mentally upon shared models of the world. Once they understand each other, we argue that 2 processes begin to take place, which are behaviour alignment and sign refinement. So going on to behaviour alignment. All right. So in the examples I've shown you so far, not only do we see that pairs of participants use motivated signs to communicate, but we saw that with repeated interaction, they started using the same signs to represent the same meanings. And this behaviour alignment acts as a kind of proxy for cognitive alignment. If your partner's copying your sign and using it in a similar context, you'd be fair to assume that they know what it also means. Aligning upon a shared system of signs also minimises cognitive effort, because instead of remembering your version and your partner's version, you just remember one version that you're both using. So you can see as I've been talking, the pair in the video have been progressively aligning their signs for the word author. And in our model, we suggest that this behaviour alignment and cognitive alignment, that these 2 processes are mutually reinforcing. The more you understand your partner, the more likely you are to copy the signs that they're producing as well, and the more you copy your partner's signs, the more likely you both are to understand each other. And this is supported by studies that have specifically instructed participants not to copy each other. So in these studies, the participants who were prevented from copying their partner's signs and not allowed to behaviourally align showed lower cognitive alignment. They communicate less successfully. So here you'll see a pair of participants in the vocal modality who failed to align upon a shared sign system to communicate the word tight. And I should say the box in the top right corner, the ones that are shaded red are the incorrect guesses, and the ones in green are the correct ones. So they're only at a 50% accuracy and they're not doing very well. So they had pretty limited success and they never aligned upon the same system. They just kept repeating their own signs. And in our studies, just like we quantified sign motivation, we also quantified sign alignment from 0 to 6. So again, low alignment is a 0 and high alignment, where you're basically reproducing the same signs, is a 6. And again, we found that there was a linear trend. So greater alignment is associated with higher identification accuracy, and that's true both for gestures and for vocalizations as well. So the last process in our model is sign refinement. Although to be more specific, I should really say it's sign refinement and symbolization. After all, we've explained how sign systems can arise from motivated signs and how they can become shared over repeated interactions. But we haven't yet accounted for the fact that our languages that we use today are largely unmotivated and pretty symbolic. In our model, we argue that this interaction drives cognitively aligned people to start refining and symbolizing their sign system, and that this is what helps it improve its efficiency. And we have evidence of this in lab-based referential tasks. So for instance, in Pictionary-based tasks, like this one, participants had to communicate lists of words to a partner through line drawings. Just as in the vocal and gestural tasks I've shown you, the pair swap roles across games. So first one person draws and their partner guesses, and then they guess and their partner draws. And over a series of 6 games, you see that their initially motivated sign for computer becomes simpler and simpler, and as it's simplified, it loses its motivation. If you have a really simple sign, there's just less detail that you can, there's less space to have motivation within the sign, because it's, as you can see, it's just a little inverse U in the final example. And we see a similar thing, but it's less pronounced in our gestural and vocal tasks. So here's a pair communicating region at game 1, game 2, and at game 6. And you'll see that by game 6, their sign is much simpler, and it would be difficult for an outsider to really guess its meaning in any sort of easy way. So it's simplified a little bit at that point, but you'll see by game 6, they've developed a shared, simpler and more symbolic sign. It's less iconic than the initial one was, although the initial one was kind of, I think the reason it took us such a long time was because it's pretty hard to communicate region in a motivated way. So we've covered the different processes in the model, but there's one last thing to touch on, which is the type of interaction that causes these processes to occur. It's not just general interaction that causes individuals to refine and symbolize their sign systems. Instead, behaviour alignment has been shown to occur as a result of interacting individuals taking turns between speaking and listening, while sign refinement occurs as a result of concurrent interactive feedback. So things like looks of confusion or comprehension, ahas of understanding, and things like that you get from your partner right in the moment. And support for this comes from a study by Simon Garrett and his colleagues, where they varied the kinds of interactions that people were able to engage in. They found that it was interactive feedback that was essential for sign simplification, and that if pairs were allowed to take turns at communicating, they would tend to align upon a shared sign system. In their second experiment, they looked at what sort of feedback led to this sign refinement, and they found that it was only the moment-to-moment interactive concurrent feedback that led people to refine and simplify their signs. So the feedback really needs to occur in the here and now for it to have a big impact on the sort of signs people develop over time. So that's our model of sign creation and change. As it relates to language evolution and pantomime, we can say that our empirical studies really highlight the importance of using motivated signs in order to get language going. It seems really likely that our pre-verbal ancestors would have relied heavily upon motivated signs to make their meaning clear when they didn't already have a shared language. Whether or not this includes some motivated vocalizations, we don't know. I suspect that motivated vocalizations also play a part, but as the videos I've shown you hopefully illustrate, people are just much better able to create motivated signs through gestures, because they can use this whole body physical reenactment, whereas with motivated sounds it's a bit more limited. So it seems that pantomime then remains a really good candidate for a motivated form of communication that could have preceded speech. Through their motivated reenactments, our ancestors might have been able to begin communicating about all number of things. Once their kin understood them, the whole group could have begun to align upon a shared system of signs, which, with reuse and interactive feedback, would have gradually become simpler and less iconic. As I say, whether these sign systems started first with the hands, then moved to the lips, or whether they involved both gestures and vocalizations from the start, is a subject that definitely demands further investigation, which we see from this conference lots of people have been looking at as well. But for now, I'll leave you with this quote from Eduardo Galliano. When it's genuine, when it is born out of the need to speak, no one can stop the human voice. When denied a mouth, it speaks with the hands or the eyes or the paws or anything at all. Thanks.